Hi, and welcome to Kimberley Stories. I'm Shanker, and right up until midday, we'll be catching up with some fun and interesting people of the Kimberley and find out what makes them tick. We'll also feature music from the Kimberley as well as far corners of the globe. So sit back, relax. You're tuned into Kimberley Stories with Shanker on Warringah Radio, 693 AM. Good morning and welcome to another episode of Kimberley Stories here on Warringah Radio, 693 AM. So a big hello to all our listeners across the Kimberley and also across Australia. We are now live streaming here at Warringah Radio on warringahyradio.com.au. So we do actually have a couple of listeners all the way from Mulgrave, Victoria that I just want to say hello to. Bill and Barbara Ponticus, friends of the Kimberley Stories program. Thanks for listening in today. What an exciting show we have today on this wonderful, gorgeous Saturday morning. We have with us today a friend and a guest, and I guess he's probably been here longer than I have. He's been a pastor with the Uniting Church here in Kununurra now for the past couple of years, but he's been a pastor in his life for the past 30 years. He is Bruce Gallacher, who has worked all across regional Australia and remote Australia, comes from Western Victoria, and we are very, very lucky to have you in the studio today. Welcome, Bruce.
Thanks, Shanker. Good to be here.
And welcome back to Kimberley Stories here on Warringah Radio, 693 AM. We have in the studio this morning a really, really interesting person. He goes by the name of Bruce Gallacher, and he is a minister with the Kununurra Uniting Church. Welcome, Bruce. Bruce, you grew up in Victoria.
That's right. In Hamilton.
A place called Hamilton.
The wool capital of the world.
Is that where the big sheep is in Hamilton? Is that right?
They used to have lots of sheep, merinos largely.
But there's large, very, very large, like the big pineapple, a big, giant, large sheep. Is that in Hamilton?
I don't know. It's a long time since. No, I don't think I've seen a sheep there. I mean, an artificial thing on a statue, I'm not sure. Haven't seen one. It's a long time since I've been back. When
what we're talking about the early 60s, weren't we?
No, I'm older than that.
You're older than that. Sorry, you're so young. Very, very young looking.
You're not supposed to try and con me on air. I was born, I'm an after the war's child, so I was born in 1949. And it was an interesting time to be alive, I guess. Didn't think about it till you get older, I suppose. And, families didn't automatically have a car, let alone two cars or whatever they have today. And families relied on each other a lot more. It's an interesting concept in today where everybody's their own little satellite.
Speaking of family, Bruce, who is Big Ali?
Big Alec.
Big Ali? Who's that?
Big Alec is my dad, and he was a big man that the people from Hamilton would come to give them a hand when they couldn't lift stuff or move stuff. It was Dad they called on, Big Al, to come and do the work for them. Yeah.
Your mother was a nurse.
She was.
And what role did she have in your life in terms of you, I guess, getting closer to the local church there? Did she play a role at all, do you think?
I think so. I was reared a Presbyterian, and in the Presbyterian church they have communion once a quarter. And I think my mother would have gone to church a lot more than she did because my dad wasn't too keen, and she dragged him along 4 times a year, plus Easter and Christmas, of course. And so I suppose I was about 15, and my mother was quite convinced I was going to go off the rails, and so...
Church was the solution?
Well, not church so much as the Presbyterian Fellowship Association, which was the youth group.
Right.
And they were big back then. A lot more so than they are today. And so I got involved in PFA, and through that became more involved in the church. Yeah.
Before you got involved with the church, though, Scouts came into your life, and a little known fact about you is that you were actually quite actively involved with the Scout movement for about 25 years.
That's right, yeah. Started as a cub and went through the ranks, and then became a leader and then a district leader.
You're a very, very community-minded person, Bruce. Do you think the Scouting sort of involvement in your early years played a part in where you are today?
Oh, I'm sure it did.
Is Scouts still big today, Bruce? Are there active scouting communities out there still?
There are, but it's not the same as it. If you go back to the 60s, 70s, maybe the early 80s, every town had a scout group and a guides group. Now they're Girl Scouts, and I think Cubs have gone. They don't call it Cubs anymore. So there's been a huge move in all of that. I think it's a sad thing, and I think it's really sad that society as a whole has lost that community base. Modern technology, I think, has a lot to play in there. I mean, back when I was a kid, there was absolutely no way that sport was played of a Sunday, or so people did things as a family and as a group. Yeah.
You have previously described your dad as a very tough character, and one of the things that you've said that he helped instill in you was a respect for elders. Yes.
There was a lady, an Indigenous lady, who went by the name of Gracie. This is when I was very, very small. And she was an alcoholic, and my brother and I didn't really understand what that was. And Gracie was down the street very, very drunk one day, and we were down the street with my parents, and my brother and I laughed at Gracie when she fell over. And we got the thrashing of our lives for showing disrespect. So I was very young when I started to realise that maybe there's a reason why that lady is falling over drunk.
These people in your life, your mother and your father and your brother, if they were to know now, and as I guess your brother does know, that you have been serving as a minister for the last 30 years, I mean, would they have ever thought that back in Hamilton, you growing up, this would be the life path that you would choose?
No, in a word. My mother, I don't know. She seemed. I was fairly involved in the church long before she died, but I was an elder in the church and taught Sunday school and things, and she certainly thought that was good. Dad by that stage had died, and my brother's taken a very different path to mine. So, but he's pretty pleased with the way my life's turned out, I guess.
When we come back after this break, we are going to find out about what that point in your life. And we have in the studio this morning Bruce Gallacher from the Uniting Church here in Kununurra. We've just been hearing Bruce's early life story, and we've got to this point now in the journey where Bruce is about to make a massive decision in his life, where he's going to go back to school to become a minister. Bruce, you were in your early 30s when you were basically this point in your life where you could have gone to America and trained to become a manager of business, but decided to stay here with your young family and go back to school. What was going through your mind, and what was that all about for you?
Well, it actually started before that. I was managing the office at a place called Southeastern Traders, which was a hardware wholesaler that reached through the lower end of South Australia and Western Victoria. And its main office was in Mount Gambier, and we met up with modern technology when computers came in, and so I was made redundant. They closed the office. And the day that happened was not only the day my youngest daughter was born, but also the day that one of the two ministers from Portland was involved in a serious car accident. And so I went and helped out at the church, and Peter eventually died. And out of that came the story that Peter's wife said that he had told her that I was going to be a minister. I said, "Oh yeah, right, good."
There you go. Your future's being told.
And it had been suggested before, but that was really the start of the journey in depth, I guess. And then I was offered a job out at Softwoods in the office there, Softwood Holdings, which was very big back then, and particle board factories there were a few in Australia, it was quite a few. And I was going through the throes of what was I going to do. If I really was serious about becoming a minister, I had left school at the end of Form 3 or Year 9, so I would have, in the Uniting Church, you have to go to university and get a Bachelor of Theology. You have to have a prior degree before you do that, and so it's a long haul. And I was married with 4 kids, so... But anyway, it's past history now.
What goes through someone's mind, do you think? I mean, when you sort of say, okay, my role and my career and my profession is going to be to now forever spend every Sunday standing in front of a congregation and pretty much delivering these sermons or whatever else that you do. I mean, what? It's a massive responsibility, I guess, and obviously very different, or not so different, I suppose, to what you were doing at Portland. But tell me through the psychology of, okay, I'm going to become a pastor. What does that involve for you? Or what did that involve?
There's a thing called faith. But on a more practical level, I suppose it's a huge financial strain on a family. It means living in object poverty for 5 years, and it meant it was hard on my wife, I think. She's always been very supportive, and she wouldn't probably say that, but I'm sure there were times when we were wondering where the next dollar was coming from, and one of the kids' shoes fell apart, or it could be pretty dramatic. So it wasn't an easy time financially and practically, but I think those types of things either bring a family together or they blow them apart. My wife is not only the love of my life, she's also my best friend and my confidant, and there's no secrets between us. So she was a great support, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without her. And our kids too have always been great in support.
And certainly the next few years of you going to school and going to university was just obviously the very, very outset of a journey that would pretty much be the next 30 years of you travelling to all sorts of places, working. Yeah. And they all came with you on that, didn't they?
Yes, they did. Yeah, we've dropped kids off along the way. Or Mark, who goes by the name of Ted up here.
We all know Ted. Hi, Ted.
Mark, he was in Queensland, but now here. And we've got a daughter in Adelaide, married with three kids, and a daughter married in Bendigo with three kids, and the youngest one lives in Melbourne, Miss Melbourne, we call her.
We're going to hear a bit more about Bruce Gallacher's story right after this song, and we're going to find out about some of these travels that you've been on, Bruce. the last 30 years of being a minister. Bruce, a lot of your work involves or has involved going out to small communities, large communities, doing a lot of community outreach, working in and around the communities that where you've served as a minister in the church. One of those places was Echuca, where you did a lot of work in the community in and around Echuca. When was this?
The late 90s. I had to think then, I went there at the right time, I guess. The Uniting Church in Echuca is a huge, big cathedral type building, and on the corner in town. And I used to laugh with the local priest that usually the Catholic Church or the Anglican Church gets the church at the top of the hill, but Echuca is flat and on the banks of the Murray, and the Uniting Church, or it had been a Presbyterian church prior to that, actually beat them on the contest for the best block in town. However, when the town was built, that wasn't the case, but as it changed focus, it was. And when I went there, I had been very actively involved in community events through through the AIDS work I had done. So I found it difficult to slow down, I guess, and wanted to start outreach and things, and found that the church didn't offer it. So we had to build what we were going to use.
And you did build, didn't you? You had a lot of services that you ran out of the actual premises of the church.
We did, and we started off a thing called Steps, and in there we had Hands-on Health. Hands-on Health is alternative medicine for people that can't afford it, and so chiropractic, massage,
Reiki, even you.
Reiki. And we had a vet who came and offered service, and they all volunteered their time. So that we had four chiropractors who volunteered X amount of hours a week, and the same with the others. The Murray School of Massage, a very well thought of college, is in Echuca, and it did a lot of its training on our clients. We had a drop-in centre. We started we started a breakfast program for people who needed it, and also a lunch program. I say a men's breakfast because that's where I was supposed to have been this morning.
Bruce, what proportion of the people that would benefit from these programs were churchgoers? Were there a large proportion of these?
No.
Things? Okay.
No, that wasn't the issue. It was covering a need that was not being met. I have this adage, "What would Jesus do?" And that's something that I've tried to follow. And these people needed feeding, and they needed help, and they needed care, and it was a great success, and never cost the church a cent, other than the use of the premises. So people would bring in, off the farms, would bring in milk and eggs, and I'm not sure they'd be allowed today, but it was a great experience.
You spent a lot of time, as I mentioned before, travelling around to small communities, unknown communities, and doing work and connecting with people. And one of those communities is a place called Prairie.
The pub.
The pub. I've heard a story about a certain baptism or a series of baptisms that you conducted in Prairie.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
I have a warped sense of humour, as some people are aware now, and I did a baptism out at the Prairie pub,
So where is Prairie, by the way?
Prairie is between Hughenden and Charters Towers on the Flinders Highway. If you're passing through there, people, you get the best meal at the Prairie pub. But anyway, there was 9 young babies and children to be baptised off stations, and they got together at the Prairie pub to do this. We physicked around and we found some old church pews and a pulpit and this huge font, and set it all up in the beer gardens, and they all came in for this service. And I also taught RE at Cameron Downs and Prairie, RE, Ridge Education School, and so we got the kids going, and we played out a bush
Banjo
christening,
Patterson.
which is Banjo Patterson, and we had a great time. And anyway, the baptism all happened, and it was all lovely. And then I suddenly had this idea that we should line all these babies along the bar of the pub and get a photo. So that went really well. But then I went one step further. The fathers were all crouched down behind, holding these babies up to the back, by the back, so you didn't see them. So there was just these little tackers sitting along the bar. And I said, it looked really great if we put a stubby or a can, it was a can, I think, between their legs. So that happened. And that photo got on the front page of the Townsville paper. Did
Great.
not go down well in the church.
I was just going to say, I guess we've got a pretty fancy pub here in Hotel Kununurra. Baptisms from now on are going to be there. That's quite a story. Bruce, we're going to take a short break now, and when we come back, you mentioned some of the AIDS work that you have done in the past, and we're going to find a bit more about that when we come back after this with Bruce Gallacher, 693 AM Warringurri Radio. And you're back with Warringurri Radio, 693 Kimberley Stories with Shankar. Our guest this morning has travelled all across Australia, from as far off as Queensland, regional Victoria, and the Kimberleys. He has served small communities as well as large communities, small congregations in churches as small as 7 to large congregations as big as you get as in St Paul's Cathedral in Melbourne. Bruce Gallacher. Bruce, you've been involved with a range of sort of different ministries in your time. You've worked with mental health patients, you've worked with prison ministries, so that's going out to prisons.
Yep.
And you've also worked in the hospitals as well.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell me a little bit about, in particular, your work with the Alfred Hospital and in particular Ward 7?
Yeah. I'm a qualified hospital chaplain, and I was asked to take on chaplaincy at the Alfred Hospital. The Alfred, for those who don't know, is one of the largest hospitals in Victoria, the trauma hospital. And also, after the closure of Heidelberg, which was the HIV/AIDS hospital back then, Ward 7 became the AIDS ward, it was called. And I did extensive work there, working with people. When you work closely in something like that, you can't do it unless you've looked at yourself too. And I think looking at your own sexuality and your own morals and your own fallibilities.
Could you say a little bit about Ward 7? So what exactly were you walking into when you walked into Ward 7?
Lots of young people dying, mainly men.
And they were dying of?
Of AIDS.
Yeah.
And it was a bit of a shock when I first went there, but once you get over that, and if you're prepared to be open, you learn that these people were just ordinary kids, and they were kids, a lot of them. If I tell you a couple of stories, there was one young guy that I did a lot of work with who was 19, and he'd been kicked out of home because he'd come out to his parents as being gay, and so he was kicked out of home, worked in Melbourne, got infected, and ultimately died. But he died very alone. He was a country kid. He didn't know many people in Melbourne, and he became a bit of a shut-in. And so I spent a bit of time with him. When we came to the end of the journey for him in this life, I tried to contact his parents, and his parents didn't want to know anything about it. At his funeral, this really nice young kid, there was 5 people at his funeral, and he was so alone, and he died a terrible death. There was another guy who was a bit of a joker on the ward, and he certainly had a front bigger than Myers, but like a lot of people who have a big front underneath, they're very lonely, and he'd also been rejected by his family, and friends fell away when, So
in an important sense, I guess your work was in effect providing these people with a family that they perhaps did not have at that time, and working closely in that sense and giving them that support and that company that they needed at that last sort of period of their lives.
Well, yes. What we did was there was an organisation called CAPE, and so
CAPE stood for
Churches, AIDS, Pastoral Care and Education, and I headed that up for 5 years. It was statewide, ecumenical, so all of the mainstream churches were involved in it. They didn't particularly want to know about it, but they gave us money to allow us to run it.
Could I just quickly interrupt there and ask you what was the broader environment that you're working in terms of this issue around that time? How was the community responding to this issue, and what sort of experiences did you have with that?
Well, I became known as the gay minister, which might tell you a bit about how people think.
Bruce is married with 4 children. Go on.
It doesn't mean a lot, but in the same sense that the churches didn't know how to handle it because of the moral issues, and they got really caught up in all of that. To work in it, you have to work through it yourself, and I had done that. I'm comfortable with where I am, and I think it's sad that the church has missed the opportunity to work with people just because they're different.
And so with CAPE, the organisation that you headed for 5 years, what were some of the massive challenges that were facing?
Yeah, we started remembering that back then to have AIDS meant you were going to die. It's not the case now. But we set up hospices. A lot of these men and women, more men of course, but there were women too, had nowhere to go, nowhere to live often. And so we set up hospices, we set up care teams, and it was great work, and was quite heady there for a while. And that's where I got to preach in all those big places in Melbourne, St Paul's and the others.
You still, to this day, occasionally visit families that have had children involved with or affected by HIV and AIDS?
I do. When I left Melbourne, I was when I walked away from that, I was pretty broken, very worn out, and that's when I went to Echuca. I hadn't been at Echuca long, and I got a phone call from the Victorian AIDS Council asking if I would visit some families, and so that started me on the next course where I would be asked to go and visit a family and talk to them about what it means to have a son or daughter living with HIV.
It's very important work that you did there, Bruce, and certainly it was internationally recognised and involved you going as far away as places like Papua New Guinea and Burma to do some of this work. We'll hear more about that just after this next song. We're listening to Kimberley Stories, you're listening to Kimberley Stories on Warringah Radio at 693 AM. You're with Shankar and Bruce Gallacher, who has been internationally recognised for his work on HIV and AIDS in terms of community outreach and education. Bruce, a lot of the work that you were doing in the Alfred Hospital and Ward 7 there, which you talked about, gained a lot of, I guess, recognition from all sorts of people here in Australia, but also overseas. You went to places as far as Papua New Guinea and Burma. Could you share some of that with us?
Yeah. I was asked to go to PNG to assess some programs being run by AusAid, money that was being given by Australia to the churches over in PNG, and so I went over to see that and to assess the programs, and I was there for 2 months doing that, and unfortunately, although we all believe in family values, and I hope we all believe in family values, they didn't always stick to those, and so the need for condoms, and I would say it loudly in the Kimberley, the need for safe sex is all important, and sadly in PNG that message hasn't got through, and now they're saying that a third of PNG is infected.
That's huge. That's absolutely
it's
huge.
Enormous, and down the it's so bad over there that once you get to a certain level along the way of treatment, if you've been able to get treatment anyway, it's taken away to give to somebody else who will benefit from it for a while before it gets too bad.
You just mentioned before that sort of family values topic. How's it been for you as a minister in a church to, well, basically advocate for things like safe sex and knowing that broader context of, well, the church's attachment to things like family values?
I don't have a problem with it at all. As I said earlier, I've worked through those issues, and I think often people are not put in a place where they have to. It's very easy to be judgmental. It's very easy to condemn others. It's a lot harder to walk beside them and to assist them, to help them, and to be with them. And that's what I've tried to do. And I've found the most beautiful of people out there. With family values, which, I mean, most people want to have family values, but anyone who's been young, and that's everyone that's out there, they know the trials and temptations, and it's not for me to condemn, but I do want I want my kids and everybody else's kids to be safe, and there are no second chances.
Bruce, you went to Burma to work closely with Buddhist monks there. That's an interesting story, isn't it?
It is. I went to Burma, and the day to work with Buddhist monks and to help set up hospices and care centres for people living with HIV. And the day before I left Australia, there was 99 monks, and we don't know how many people with HIV/AIDS disappeared, and they were all murdered. And so I didn't know whether I was going or not. I got there and was met by a man with a gun, and
very welcoming.
That was my story for the next 6 weeks. This man with a gun followed me around and told me what I could and couldn't do.
So, when you went over to Burma, you went as a minister of a church, but you worked with...
No, I didn't. No? I wouldn't have been allowed in the country.
Right.
So, I just went over as Bruce Gallacher, private citizen, on the surface anyway. Because the junta are pretty... although they've loosened some of the ties, the junta didn't want any of this religious stuff, and they didn't acknowledge that they had HIV/AIDS in Burma, or Myanmar is what it's called. Yeah.
So, did you ever see the opportunity to do mission work?
Well, I had a great enforced holiday for a while, and that was great, wonderful. So I travelled all over Burma and had a great time. I had a local guy who drove me around, and I met some amazing people.
Did you convert anybody, Bruce?
I didn't try, Shankar. And got to see... one of the things I really want to do was go to a real village, and they try and stop tourists from going to some of them. So I actually got to go to one, and for anyone who can remember back to the film The Great Escape, the star of the film's running across this paddock, and he's waiting for the Germans to shoot him in the back. And I was running through a rice paddy in a pair of scuffs, holding a bag, and this army guy that had been with me with this machine gun all the time, I suddenly had this vision that I was going to be shot in the back, and I turned around and the gun's just lying on his shoulder and his hands are on his hip and he was just shaking his head, and I thought, I'm not that important. He wasn't going to get his shoes dirty for me.
You're listening to Kimberley Stories with Shankar, and we have Bruce Gallacher with us. And you're listening to Kimberley Stories on Warringah Radio, 693 AM here in the East Kimberley, where it has just clocked over to 11 o'clock in the morning. We have in the studio here Bruce Gallacher, who has done all sorts of things, including running away from the junta in Burma, where we finished the last segment of. What an interesting experience that would have been, Bruce, in this place where you're doing a 100-metre sprint across rice paddies and trying to save your life.
The funny ending to that run was bursting through these reeds and coming face to face with the ugliest, dirtiest, biggest black pig I've ever seen, and it brought me up short very quickly. But anyway.
What were you doing in that village, Bruce?
I wanted to see how a real village worked, and so the guy that showed me around organised it for me, and it was organised through a husband and wife who were both doctors who had their licence to practice taken away from them by the junta because they wouldn't bow to the junta's demands.
The junta was the Burmese military rule. Yeah.
And in that village, it was amazing. All the black market activities that go on simply to so that they can survive. It was taken into one house, and there's all these people sitting, rolling the biggest, fattest, I don't know what they're called, marijuana joints, and as well as cigars and all that sort of stuff. I had morning tea with the bishop, the abbot, of the village.
What were they doing? What were some of these doctors and the bishops doing in terms of the work that you were related to?
Well, the doctors were running a B&B because they couldn't practice anymore. The morning tea with the abbot was amazing. It brings you up short when you come from our culture where we just expect food to be on the table, and all of a sudden you sit down and you realise that all this food that's being put in front of you has been obtained through begging, and I was put in that. Myself, I felt if I eat this, I'm taking away their food, and if I don't, I'm insulting them. So it was pretty confronting for me. Then I went to the school, which was just this little village hut, dirt floor, and a blackboard that needed blacking, and but here were these kids sitting on this dirt floor, and kids are kids wherever they be, and wasn't quite as bad as, I mean, the education is a huge thing that needs to be entered into, but the kids are certainly happy kids in the environment.
You were in Burma though with a purpose. I mean, you were working closely with.
I went to do that role, which was. But on the last, it was right towards the end of my time there. It was arranged, without my knowledge, for me to run a whole day of seminars, which I did. And
what were these seminars on?
On setting up hospices, on how to treat people with HIV. And
you were saying that these Buddhist monks were involved with that, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. They were the ones that were going to set up the hospices.
Have you, in your time as a minister, done much work with other faiths in terms of community outreach or education activities? Have you done much multi-faith sort of work?
I've always been open to being involved with other faiths. I've been on committees looking at all the different faiths, talking with different faiths, Christianity and the other faiths that are all around us, and it's a very rich. When we can, I've said it in this town too. I'll probably get shot now, but if only all of our churches could work together, we could do such good. But we all go our own way, and it's very difficult. Seems to be very difficult for people to work together, and I think that's a huger sin than a lot of what churches consider sin.
You first came to the Kimberley when you were first ordained as a minister, back in the 80s, wasn't it? That you first came to Broome, and then you left after a couple of years.
3 years.
3 years. And then you came back in the last 2 years to work here in Kununurra. What sort of relationship do you think you have with this place in the Kimberley? You've described this place as home.
I love the Kimberley. It's not where I will end up, but it will always have a special place for me. I think the Kimberley is a place you love, or I don't know, maybe you hate it. I don't know, but the environment is just wow. But so are the people, and it's the people that make the place. In the end of the day, it's not the scenery; it's the people.
In a book written by a guy called Bill March, titled "Great Australian Outback School Stories," you write, "As a patrol minister, I'm ecumenical in my dealings. It's got nothing to do with Bible bashing or trying to convert a person to this belief or that. I don't even plug the Uniting Church. What
Where did you get hold of that?
what I was just curious about is what is it that you then feel like you do in a lot of the work that you do as a patrol minister, when you go out and provide pastoral support, or what is described as pastoral support? What does all that mean? What are you actually doing in this town?
Walking beside the people, being able to help them where they're needed, where we can help, and being a friend, just being. I think in our world we're so busy achieving that we forget to just be, and to be able to do that with someone who's in need is not trying to solve their problems, but just being there with them, for them, to support them.
Bruce, it's been an absolute pleasure, an absolute honour to have you in this studio with us today, and this interview will shortly be available somewhere on the internet. I'll let listeners know about all that next week. Is there anything else that you wanted to share or add before we disappear?
No, that's fine, Shanker.
Thanks again. We've been having the pleasure of listening to Reverend Bruce Gallacher from the Uniting Church here in Kununurra. You've been listening to Kimberley Stories with Shanker here on this Saturday morning, 693 Warringah Radio. Please join us next week, same time, same place, and we'll have a very exciting young lady in the studios with us, Natasha Shaw.